Are you stupid or just useless? Derek's voice exploded through the dining room the second Sarah's hand slipped. The bowl tipped, soup arcing through the air before crashing onto his lap. Hot broth soaked into his trousers, steam rising as if the meal itself were shocked by what it had done. The punch came immediately. Not a slap. Not a warning. A closed fist. I saw it clearly, the twist of his shoulder, the force behind it. I heard it too. A sharp, sickening crack that did not belong in a home, let alone on Christmas afternoon. Sarah's head snapped sideways. Her body slammed into the wall beside the sideboard, and one of my porcelain Christmas angels shattered as she slid down, leaving a faint smear of blood behind her. Blood. On my wall. From my daughter's mouth. Sarah crumpled to the floor, one hand shaking as it pressed against her lip. Red bloomed instantly, bright and undeniable against the white sweater I had given her that morning. I am Margaret Wilson. I am 64 years old. And the man who had just punched my daughter was my son-in-law. I'm a mother, a retired nurse, a woman who thought that if you stayed calm and kind long enough, even the cruelest people might soften. I believed in giving space, in letting couples work things out. But that belief cost my daughter dearly. Sarah was on the floor. My daughter, bleeding, and Derek, my son-in-law, stood over her like a scolding coach. Marcus, his older brother, leaned back casually, lifting a glass of Cabernet. Finally, he muttered. Someone had to teach her to shut up. The room felt like it tilted. The world itself cracked. Derek turned to me then, and the fire in his eyes burned hotter. This is what happens when you raise a spoiled brat. She doesn't respect anyone. Maybe if you'd taught her better, if your ghetto little family had any class, she wouldn't act like a damn child. His words hit like slaps. You don't know how to raise a daughter, Margaret, he sneered, but I'm fixing that. I stood there, paralyzed. I wanted to move, to speak, but I couldn't. His words stung more than I expected. He had never said it out loud before, that contempt for our family. For me, I had always known Derek looked down on us. But hearing it, that was different. We should have never come here, he spat. Sarah's wasting her life tied to this broke, backward, low-class side of town. Sarah sobbed into her hands. I knelt beside her slowly, afraid to see what I'd missed all year. And when I pulled her hands gently away to dab her lip, her sleeve slipped back, and that's when I saw them. Bruises, purple, yellow, old, fresh. On her wrist, her forearm, even the ridge of her collarbone. Not one, not two. A map of pain no mother should ever see on her child. Oh my God, I whispered, my voice shaking for the first time. Baby, I didn't mean to spill it, she choked out. I was just nervous. I didn't mean to. You don't ever have to apologize for being afraid, I said. But I was already unraveling inside. My stomach dropped, my chest tightened, and I could feel the shame rising hot, sharp, unbearable. I didn't see it. I didn't protect her. How many times had I hugged her and not noticed how she flinched? How many explanations had I swallowed because I wanted so badly to believe she was happy? I believed her lies because it was easier than facing the truth. Derek scoffed, still pacing like the injured party. Here we go. Time for the tears. Maybe you should teach her how to pour a bowl before handing her a ring. You need to leave, I said quietly. He laughed, loud and bitter. You don't tell me what to do, old woman. This is between me and my wife. I stood then, fully, no shaking, no fear. No, I said, it's between you and me now. I reached into my cardigan pocket and pulled out my phone. There was only one number I needed. I hadn't called Jack Morrison in 15 years. Not since my husband passed. Not since I swore to leave that life of late-night stakeouts and hospital trauma behind. But sometimes life circles back, demanding more of you when you thought you were done. The phone rang once, twice. Margaret? Jack's gravel voice answered. Is everything okay? No, I said. I need you at my house. Bring people you trust. What's going on? I glanced at Sarah, trembling. At Derek, full of rage. At Marcus, sipping wine like he was watching TV. Domestic violence. And something deeper. I think there's more. I'm on my way, Jack said. Don't let them leave. I ended the call. Derek's eyes narrowed. Who did you call? Someone who's going to dig into the things you thought were buried, I said. and he's bringing a shovel." Derek pulled out his own phone and growled into it. "We've got a situation. The old woman's going nuts. You need to get here now." He hung up, flashing me a smile. "You want trouble, Margaret? You've got it." The police arrived first, then Jack and his team. Then the house began to shift. Questions were asked, photographs taken. Sarah finally said the words she'd never dared to say. "He hit me." When Derek was let out in handcuffs, he hissed something into Sarah's ear that made her go still. An officer caught it and added another charge. Later that night, I found myself alone in the dining room, holding the broken angel ornament that had fallen during the attack. I turned it over in my hands slowly. I used to believe that love could fix things, that time and space and prayer were enough. But peace without justice is just a wound waiting to rot, and I will never let rot grow in my house again. If you felt Margaret's strength, like this video and comment where you're watching from someone near you might be watching too. Jack Morrison arrived 23 minutes after I made the call. Not a second late, not a second early. That was Jack. He hadn't aged much since the last time I saw him. Same steel gray hair cropped tight, same worn leather jacket, and the same eyes that had once stared down murderers without blinking. With him were two men I didn't recognize, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other wiry and quiet, and a woman with a clipboard and soft voice who introduced herself as Mia, a domestic violence advocate. They didn't knock. They came through the front door like they'd done it 100 times, badges in hand, movements quiet but direct. And just like that, the room that had held tension like a storm cloud suddenly felt like it had opened to fresh air. Derek, still pacing like a lion with a limp, froze mid-step. "Who the hell are you?" he barked. Jack didn't flinch. "Jack Morrison, private investigator. I'm here at the request of the homeowner." "This is a family matter," Marcus started. Jack cut him off. "No, this is a legal matter. The moment your brother laid hands on a woman, in front of multiple witnesses, in her mother's home, he turned it into something else entirely." Jack's men flanked the room without intimidation, but with purpose. Mia walked straight to Sarah, still curled on the couch with a damp towel pressed to her lip. I'd wrapped a throw blanket around her while we waited, but she hadn't stopped trembling. Not once. "Hi, sweetheart," Mia said gently. "You're safe now, okay? I'm here to help you get through this. All of it." Sarah looked up at her, eyes glassy, then at me. I nodded. Jack turned to me. "Tell me everything, Margaret. From the top." So I did. I kept it simple. The soup, the punch, the insults, the bruises I'd seen, the bruises I hadn't seen before today, the call Derek made to some unknown contact, Marcus's smug comment, the fear that had soaked into the walls of my home. "Something about the way they carry themselves," I said, lowering my voice. "It's not just about the abuse. There's something else. Derek's always had money that doesn't match his job. He says he's in sales, but he never works normal hours. He and Marcus both act like they're above everything." Jack's eyes sharpened. "That tracks with a few things I've been hearing. Nothing I can say out loud yet, but your instincts are usually dead on." "They've got a whole rhythm to how they work," I said. "Sarah told me he makes her stay upstairs when they have people over, and it's always late, always secretive." Derek was trying to shout over us now, but one of Jack's men calmly stepped between him and the rest of the room. Derek's voice dropped to a low snarl. "This is illegal. You have no right. You laid your hands on someone in front of 8 witnesses," Jack said coolly. "You'll be lucky if you walk out of here without another set of charges." The police arrived minutes later. Jack stepped aside to let them take over. Statements were given. Sarah's injuries were documented by a female officer with the kindest eyes I'd seen in a long time. I could see her heart breaking behind her professionalism as she snapped pictures of Sarah's face. Derek was cuffed and read his rights. He didn't go quietly. "You're gonna regret this," he hissed to Sarah as he passed. "All of you will." "Stop," one officer barked. "That's intimidation of a witness. That's another charge." "I have brought it in turn." Marcus tried to leave too. Jack blocked his path with a calmness that was far more terrifying than shouting. "I'd stick around if I were you. Something tells me you'll be getting a few questions real soon." "Am I being detained?" "Not yet," Jack said. "But the night's still young." Once they were both gone, the house sagged into a strange silence. Christmas dinner sat cold and untouched on the table. The tree still blinked in the corner like a bad joke. My husband helped Sarah upstairs to lie down, and I went into the kitchen, where Jack was already setting up his laptop. "You think there's more," he said without looking up. "I do," I said. "Call it gut. Call it knowing that something evil doesn't stay small forever." He nodded. "You always had good instincts. Let's dig in." While Jack began checking Derek's background, business licenses, employment history, financial records, I started pacing. I couldn't sit still. I kept thinking about the bruises, about the trembling in Sarah's fingers, about every moment I hadn't asked enough questions because I didn't want to pry. Jack paused. "Margaret, I need to ask, why did you call me, after all this time?" "Because I knew this wasn't just a bad marriage," I said. "I've seen bad marriages. This was something else. Something planned, calculated, hidden, and because I don't trust the police to see past the punch. It's starred you, eh?" "Charlie won." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded again. "I'll find the rest." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, "and neither is she." Later that night, I brought Sarah a cup of tea. She sat in her old bedroom, curled up with her childhood blanket, knees tucked under her chin. "Mom," she whispered when I stepped inside. "I'm sorry." "No," I said, setting the tea down. "You never have to say that, ever." "I should have told you," she said. "I should have left him the first time I cut her off gently. "Sweetheart, you survived. That's enough. But I need you to be honest with me now." She hesitated, then nodded, and she began to talk. About the late-night meetings, about the strangers in the basement, about money, accidents, and threats. About how Derek said no one would believe her because his family had connections and my family had none. About how Marcus watched, always watched, but never helped. Every word tightened something in my chest, and every word made me more certain that this wasn't just domestic violence. This was organized crime. Sarah looked up at me when she finished. "What happens now?" I took her hand. "Now, we make sure he doesn't do this to anyone else." The morning after the explosion that tore our family Christmas apart, I stood in the kitchen staring at a cup of coffee. I couldn't bring myself to drink. The house was too quiet. No music, no footsteps, no sounds of wrapping paper or leftovers being reheated. Just silence. And I hated it. Sarah was upstairs asleep, or trying to be. Jack had stayed until after 2 a.m., combing through Derek's online footprint, cross-referencing names from past claims, digging into shell companies, financial transfers, anything that felt off. And there was plenty that felt off. He promised to come back in the morning. I told him he didn't need to say that I already knew he would. I poured the coffee down the sink and stepped into the living room. The Christmas tree lights were still blinking. The gifts were still piled in the corner, unopened. It all looked absurd now, a backdrop for a disaster. Then I heard the knock. I opened the door slowly, prepared for anything. But it wasn't police. It wasn't Jack. It was Jennifer, Marcus's wife. She stood on my porch in a coat too thin for December, her eyes rimmed red and tired, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. "Privately?" I stepped aside without a word and led her into the kitchen. She sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the mug. I sat down like it might anchor her. She didn't drink from it. "I didn't come last night because Marcus told me not to," she said. "He said it was family business. That Sarah overreacted. That your family always makes things dramatic." I waited. But that wasn't true. I saw what happened, Margaret, and I've seen other things too. Things I didn't want to believe. I sat down across from her. "I think they've been doing something illegal," she whispered. "Marcus and Derek. They talk in code, they meet with people late, and they don't let me near their computers. I saw Marcus burn some papers in the grill last week, said it was junk mail, but I saw charts. Names. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked gently. She looked at me, eyes filling. "Because Sarah could have died, and because I'm scared. I think I've been scared for a long time. But watching what happened, I can't pretend anymore." It was hard to imagine Jennifer as a victim. She always seemed pulled together, polished, quiet, but I saw it now in the way she sat, hunched, guarded, hands trembling slightly with every breath. "I didn't know how to help," she said. "Marcus makes the money. I thought, if I just stayed quiet, it would be okay. Silence doesn't keep us safe," I said softly. "It just keeps them in power. It doesn't her." She nodded. "I want to talk to Jack. Can I trust him?" With your life, I said. I called Jack, and within 30 minutes, he arrived with Mia. Jennifer spoke to them in the study for over an hour while I sat outside the door, sipping reheated coffee and trying to keep my breathing steady. When Jack finally emerged, his expression was grave. She confirmed a lot, he said quietly. Names, patterns, some locations, enough to push things forward. Margaret, this might be bigger than we thought. How big? He hesitated. Organized fraud. At least a dozen people involved, maybe more. They've been staging accidents, falsifying injuries, submitting insurance claims, then laundering the money through fake settlements. And from what Jennifer said, they may have had people hurt, for real, maybe even worse. My blood ran cold. They've pulled in folks who were desperate, homeless, addicts, people who wouldn't ask questions, paid them a fraction of the payout. Some of them ended up in the hospital. One woman might have died from it. I put my hand over my mouth. Oh God. That's why they isolate their wives, he added. Keep them quiet, keep them scared, because if someone starts talking, it all unravels. Sarah came down the stairs as he said it, her face pale but determined. I'll talk, she said. I'll tell everything I know. Jack looked at her with deep respect. That's brave. It is stared absable reading that. It's necessary, she replied. She sat at the table beside me and reached for my hand. Her grip was firmer than I expected. Strong, steady. They thought they could hide it all behind charm and fake smiles, she said. But they forgot something. My mom raised me to pay attention. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You've been paying attention all along, even when I wasn't. Jack gave her a nod. We'll bring in someone from the FBI this afternoon. They've had their eye on a few of these guys, but this is the crack they needed. He stood. They're going down, Margaret. Every last one of them. Later that evening, Sarah and I sat on the back porch. It was cold, but neither of us wanted to be inside. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and handed her a mug of hot cider. The sky was deep blue, heavy with the promise of snow. I was so stupid, she said suddenly. To stay, to believe him. No, I said firmly. You were scared. That's not stupid. That's human. I thought I could fix it. That if I was better, quieter, more patient, he wouldn't get angry. I shook my head. You didn't make him angry. He was already broken. She leaned against me. He told me no one would believe me, that your family was trash, that I'd end up alone if I left. I took a breath, fighting the sting in my eyes. He underestimated you, and he underestimated me. It's take-stitted comments. We sat in silence, the wind picking up slightly, rustling the dead leaves in the yard. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter. Do you think it's really over? She asked. Not yet, I said. But the storm has started. And this time, I wasn't going to run from it. Jack called his contact at the bureau shortly after Jennifer left. The agent's name was Daniel Kim, a man Jack trusted from a joint task force they'd worked on a decade ago. By late afternoon, Agent Kim stood in my living room with a notepad in hand, his eyes scanning the Christmas lights still dangling from the mantel, as if trying to reconcile holiday cheer with the gravity of the case unfolding around us. He was young, mid-30s, clean-cut, quiet, the kind of quiet that meant he was listening to everything, even what wasn't being said. We all sat down at the dining table. Sarah to my right, her hands clasped in her lap, Jack and Agent Kim across from us. Mia was nearby with her laptop open, ready to document. The same table where Derek had struck my daughter less than 24 hours earlier now held files, printouts, and a still-wrapped gift with Sarah's name on it. Agent Kim spoke first. Mrs. Thompson, I want to begin by thanking you for being willing to speak with us. I know how difficult this must be. Sarah nodded slowly. I just want it to stop. For good. He opened a small notebook. You lived with Derek for 3 years? 3 years, 4 months, she said. We met through work. I used to run community outreach for a medical clinic in Beaverton. He came in with a friend who claimed to be injured in a car accident. I sat up straighter. You never told me that. I didn't think it mattered then, she said. I thought it was fate or something. Do you remember the friend's name? Agent Kim asked. Sarah shook her head. Only the first name Leo. He said he slipped on a gas station floor. Derek joked about how clumsy he was. It seemed harmless. But it wasn't, I muttered. Sarah's voice grew steadier. We dated. Fast. He was charming, attentive, too attentive. He always wanted to know where I was, who I was with. I thought it was love. Jack nodded grimly. That's textbook, isolation wrapped in affection. Sarah swallowed. He proposed after 6 months. We were married within a year. That's when things changed. End quote. It spend advises. It is really muth made of crime. It is really medicalin. Agent Kim leaned forward slightly. How so? He started locking his office. Told me not to come downstairs when he had friends over. Sometimes he'd be gone for hours, no explanation. And the money? It never made sense. Jack glanced up from a document. You mentioned he claimed to be in sales. Did he ever specify? Always vague. Client services. Solutions consulting. Once he said he helped people with insurance claims, which sounded harmless. But I overheard things. End quote. If you were fringes, then everything, and it mine days started 9. Like what? Agent Kim asked. Phrases like, soft tissue injury, bigger payout, and they'll believe the MRI. Once, I heard someone ask if the next crash was scheduled. My heart clenched. Sarah's voice never wavered, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. They laughed about it, she said, like it was a game. Jack tapped his pen on the table. They're using fake accidents to file real insurance claims. Agent Kim looked at him. That lines up with the ring we've been tracking. Dozens of suspicious claims filed under shell companies tied to a handful of lawyers and doctors in Oregon and Washington. Derek's name ever come up? I asked. Agent Kim hesitated. It has. He's been flagged a few times as an associate in several reports, but until now, we didn't have a witness inside. Sarah looked down at her hands. There's something else. Jack sat forward. Go ahead. There was this one night, she said. It was storming. I remember because the power kept flickering. Derek was in the basement with Marcus and 2 other men I'd never seen. I was upstairs, trying to sleep, but I heard yelling. She paused. Her voice dropped. They said something went wrong, that a guy didn't get out in time. Marcus said, we can't have a body tied to our payout. Derek told him to let it blow over. Agent Kim stilled. Did you ever hear about someone getting seriously hurt in a staged accident? I think so. The next day, Derek was frantic. He left the house early, came back late, and he smelled like smoke. He told me to throw out some boxes in the garage without opening them. I couldn't stop myself. Sarah, why didn't you tell me? She looked at me with so much sadness it hollowed my chest, because I thought if I kept quiet, it would keep you safe. It's been 4 on no. Agent Kim reached for a folder and laid out a list of names. Do you recognize any of these people? Sarah pointed to 3 immediately. That's Victor. He came over twice, always wore sunglasses, even indoors. That's Rena. She once stayed for hours. Derek said she was a valuable asset. And that one, I think that's Leo. From the first day. Jack looked impressed. You just connected 3 of our most suspicious names in one breath. Agent Kim nodded. This is enough to escalate. We'll begin pulling warrants. I'll loop in the district attorney. But I need to know, Sarah, are you willing to testify? Yes, she said, no hesitation. Do you understand what that means? He asked. You'll be the primary witness in a federal investigation. The case may last months. The trial will be brutal. They'll try to discredit you. Sarah lifted her chin. I'll be ready. I reached under the table and took her hand. You're not doing this alone. That night, Jack stayed for dinner. We heated leftovers, what was supposed to be Christmas dinner. The roast was dry, the potatoes lumpy, and none of us could finish the pie. But it wasn't about food. It was about sitting down and choosing not to be afraid. I've worked a lot of cases, Jack said, pushing his plate aside. But this might be the one that finally collapses the whole damn network. I looked across the table at Sarah, who had finally started to eat again. Then let's be the reason it does. I was curious. By the end of the week, my house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a command center. What once smelled like cinnamon and pine now carried the scent of coffee, stress, and printed paper. Every surface held folders, notes, evidence. Jack had turned our guest room into a temporary field office. Sarah spent hours each day being interviewed by agents, attorneys, victim advocates, and I stayed busy so I wouldn't fall apart. I cleaned more than I needed to. I cooked things no one had an appetite for. I walked the perimeter of the yard as if it could answer the questions I hadn't dared ask for years. That Friday morning, Jack asked to speak to me alone. We sat on the back porch with our coffee, breath curling in the cold January air. "I think it's time we talk about what this really is, Margaret," he said. "I thought we already were," I answered. "I mean the scale of it." He laid out a file. Names, dates, addresses, maps. These aren't just scams. These are operations. Coordinated, structured, professional. I scanned the pages. Car accidents, workers' comp claims, disability filings, doctors, lawyers, medical clinics. "These are real names," I whispered. Jack nodded. "We've linked over 40 fraudulent claims totaling at least $3 million, most funneled through 2 law offices and a couple of so-called injury clinics, all within driving distance of here. Marcus and Derek are at the center of every ring." My stomach turned. "They're not just part of it," he continued. "They're running it. Derek's in charge of recruitment and payouts. Marcus handles the logistics shell companies, paperwork, laundering. I thought of the dinners, the luxury cars, the smug smiles, all of it built on broken bodies and lies. "Are they hurting people?" I asked quietly. Jack paused. "Yes. And worse, they're targeting the vulnerable. Homeless, undocumented, addicts, people with no voice. They stage accidents, promise payouts, but the victims only get a fraction if they're lucky. Some are left with permanent injuries. One man is paralyzed. A woman in Tacoma died 2 years ago. Case was ruled accidental. We now think it was tied to them." I looked out across my frosty yard. The world felt suddenly smaller, uglier. "And they just kept getting away with it," I said. "Until now." "Because Sarah talked." Jack nodded. "Her testimony, plus Jennifer's, is opening doors we couldn't unlock before." He pulled out a photograph. It was a group shot 5 men, 2 women, all standing around a table with drinks, grinning like they'd just won something. Derek and Marcus were front and center. This was taken 3 months ago at a private club. FBI tracked the location through social media metadata. I stared at the picture. At Derek's eyes. The way he stood confident, smug, a man who believed no one could touch him. "They've got offshore accounts," Jack added. "We're working on freezing their assets. But it's a race now." "A race against what?" He hesitated. "Derek's lawyer is good, ruthless. They'll try to paint Sarah as bitter, unstable. They'll drag her through the mud." I felt my jaw tighten. "Let them try." Jack's expression softened. "She's strong, but this will get harder before it gets easier." Later that afternoon, Agent Kim returned with 2 new names. Dr. Lowell, a chiropractor whose name appeared on multiple suspicious reports, and an attorney named Richard Chen, Derek's longtime legal representative. "That man is no ordinary lawyer," Kim said. "He's been laundering settlements and shielding this group for years." "Can we charge him?" I asked. "Eventually," Kim replied. "But we need airtight proof." Sarah came downstairs as we talked, her face pale but resolute. She had a spiral notebook in hand, dozens of pages filled with memories, names, conversations, places. She had spent the entire morning documenting everything she could remember. "I wrote it all down," she said, "in case something happens, in case they try to make me disappear." My blood froze. "Sarah, I'm not saying they'll succeed," she said, "but I want you to have it." I took the notebook and pulled her into a hug. "They won't touch you again, not while I'm breathing. It's reasoned." She pulled away slightly, eyes glistening. "You know, I used to hate this house," she said. "Thought it was too small, too old. But now, it's the only place I feel safe." That night, I sat at the dining table long after everyone else went to bed. I flipped through Sarah's notes. One page caught my eye, a rough floor plan of our basement, marked with dates and names. She had drawn it from memory, and in the margins, she'd written a single sentence. He said they'd never find the papers. I read it twice. Then I stood, walked quietly to the basement door, and opened it. The air was cool and dry. I flicked on the light and descended slowly. The basement hadn't changed in years. Boxes of old books, a broken treadmill, my late husband's fishing gear. But something felt off now, like the walls themselves had secrets. I moved to the far corner where Derek used to keep tools. The shelf was empty now, but behind it was something I hadn't seen before. A loose panel. I knelt, heart pounding, and pried it free. Inside was a slim black folder. I opened it. Receipts, claim forms, lists of names, injury photos, diagrams, even a burner phone taped to the back cover. Proof. My knees buckled. The folder fell open on the floor as I backed away, shaking. I had just found the nerve center. I didn't sleep that night, not a second. I sat at the kitchen table until the sun came up, the black folder in front of me like a loaded weapon. I didn't touch it again after I picked it up from the basement floor. I didn't need to. I'd already seen enough. When Jack arrived that morning, I met him at the door with the folder in my hands. "I found this behind a false panel in the basement," I said quietly. He thought we'd never find it. Jack didn't speak. He took the folder from me and laid it on the dining table like he was placing a crown on an altar. Sarah and Agent Kim joined us minutes later. Everyone stood in silence as Jack carefully flipped it open. Pages and pages. Dozens of claim forms with fake medical codes, photographs of injuries that looked real enough to fool anyone, lists of victims, some with names, some with just nicknames or initials. And the phone. Jack removed it carefully, turned it over, and powered it on. A passcode screen blinked. "Give me an hour," he said. "I'll crack it. I have no helve." While Jack worked in the study, Agent Kim photographed everything in the folder and began cross-referencing claim numbers with their database. I watched from the hallway as Sarah leaned over his shoulder, pointing to a name she remembered, Vic S., a man Derek had paid to take a fall outside a grocery store in exchange for a $20,000 insurance claim. "That's him," she said. "I remember Derek saying the bruises weren't convincing enough. He made him do it again." Agent Kim looked horrified. "Do you know what happened to him afterward?" Sarah nodded. "He never came back. Derek said he disappeared." "Or was disappeared," Jack muttered from the next room. Around noon, Jack emerged, holding the phone. "Got in," he said. "You were right, Margaret. This is the nerve center." He laid the phone on the table and tapped the screen. Messages, dozens of them, code names, drop locations, schedules, voice memos. He played one of the recordings. Derek's voice. "We'll run this one like the last. Get the paperwork to Chen. Marcus has the clinic ready. Make sure the guy knows what to say. If he backs out, remind him what he owes." My hands clenched involuntarily. Sarah covered her mouth. "That's his voice." "I know," I said. "I've heard him say worse." Jack looked at Agent Kim. "This is enough for warrants, right?" Kim nodded. "More than enough." By the end of the day, the FBI had initiated paperwork for a multi-location raid. The phones of suspects were pinged, vehicles tracked, arrests coordinated, but not everyone was ready to speak. That evening, Jack sat me down in the living room. His tone had shifted less, investigator, more friend. "We need to talk about Marcus," he said. "What about him?" "Jennifer's testimony gives us a partial picture. Sarah's confirms it. But Marcus himself, he's slippery. Smart enough to never get his hands dirty. That's because he's a coward." In Enders, "Coward or not," Jack said, "he's dangerous. He enables everything, stays in the shadows, keeps his wife scared and quiet. And worst of all, he's trusted. His role in this ring is subtle documents, cover stories, silence. Silence can be violence," I said, "and I'm tired of pretending it isn't." The doorbell rang then. It was Jennifer. She looked exhausted, haunted, like the weight of her marriage had suddenly found its final form. "I can't go back," she said the moment I opened the door. "He's calling me nonstop. He says I'm destroying everything." "You did the right thing," I said. She stepped inside slowly, arms wrapped around herself. "I need protection," she said quietly. "If he finds out what I gave you." "You'll be protected," Jack said from behind me. "But we need more." Jennifer looked up at him. "What more could I give?" "You said Marcus has backups. Flash drives, records, hidden somewhere. We need them." End quote. She closed her eyes. "I know where one of them is." That night, under FBI escort, Jennifer led Jack and Agent Kim to the storage unit Marcus kept under a different name. They found financial ledgers, offshore account numbers, and signed documents that connected him directly to the fraudulent claims. The last piece clicked into place. And yet, as the agents made preparations for the morning raids, I couldn't stop thinking about all the people who had seen something and said nothing. Neighbors, friends, family. I thought about the time I saw Sarah wearing a turtleneck in July and said nothing, about how Jennifer had been silent for years, about the coworkers who joked about Derek's temper but never questioned Sarah's excuses. I stood by the window and watched the lights flicker across the snow-dusted street. How many of us had chosen comfort over confrontation? How many had let silence be the cover for cruelty? That was the night I stopped blaming just Derek and Marcus. Because there's more than one kind of abuser, and there's more than one way to be guilty. The morning of the raids was gray and bitterly cold, the kind of cold that sank into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in the downstairs hallway, buttoning up her coat with slow, careful fingers. She looked taller, somehow straighter, steadier, but I could see it in her eyes. The fear hadn't left. It had just been locked into place behind a wall of purpose. "I don't know what happens after this," she said, not looking at me. "None of us do," I replied, "but that doesn't mean we stay silent." Jack, Agent Kim, and a small army of federal agents arrived in unmarked SUVs. Mia was already there, seated beside Sarah, offering quiet encouragement as the plan unfolded across the living room coffee table. 7 locations, 4 cities, all coordinated to strike simultaneously. "This is it," Jack said. "We have probable cause, digital evidence, physical records, and multiple cooperating witnesses. We're going in heavy and clean. They won't be expecting this, right?" I asked. Kim shook his head. "We kept the circle tight. Only people we trust." And rebated. "They have lawyers," Sarah whispered. "Money, connections." "They had those," Jack corrected. "They won't have them after today." One by one, addresses were assigned to teams. Marcus's condo in Lake Oswego, Derek's office above a bogus chiropractic clinic in East Portland, 2 storage units, one shell company's front disguised as a tax prep business, and Chen's downtown law office, the polished fortress of their legal protections. "Chen's the one I want," Jack said, jaw tight. "He's cleaned up after guys like Derek for years, built an empire of silence." The agents filed out in pairs, their radios crackling softly. I watched them from the window, each footstep crunching in the snow. "They're wolves," I said, more to myself than anyone. Jack glanced at me. "Excuse me?" "Derek, Marcus, Chen, the others. They hunt in packs. They sniff out weakness, isolate, control, devour." He nodded slowly. "That's why we're burning the den down." By midday, the arrests began. Agent Kim's phone buzzed first. We got Marcus, tried to leave through the back, said he was heading to brunch, had a flash drive in his coat pocket. "Good," Jack muttered. "He'll talk. He's not built for prison." 30 minutes later, Chen's office is locked down. "We're seizing computers now." He showed up with his usual smirk until we showed him the signed affidavits. I smiled grimly. They always think they're untouchable. Asked. But the moment that brought the house to a standstill came at 1:16 p.m. Jack's phone lit up. He answered, listened, then walked into the kitchen where Sarah and I were sitting. "They got Derek," he said. Sarah stopped mid-sip. "Where?" "Private gym in West Lynn. He was boxing. Walked out of the locker room to 6 agents waiting with cuffs." Sarah didn't speak for a long moment. Then, softly, "He always said no one would ever touch him in that place, that it was his safe zone." Adias remunit. Jack tilted his head. "Not anymore." We all exhaled. That night, the news broke. Quietly at first, just a few lines on local stations. FBI raids multiple locations in Portland and surrounding counties in connection to a major insurance fraud ring. But within hours, national outlets picked it up. The story exploded. I watched it unfold from the living room, sitting beside Sarah, her hand clenched in mine, images of Derek and Marcus in cuffs, blurred footage of Chen being led out of his sleek office, boxes of evidence being wheeled down corridors, reporters shouting questions. No answers. "They're not denying it," Sarah said. "They're not even trying." "Because they know it's over," I replied. Jack returned just after midnight, exhausted but triumphant. His clothes were still dusted with snow, his breath fogging the air. "We're done," he said, voice low. "We've dismantled the structure. The records, the shell companies, the accounts. It's all going to be handed to the prosecutors." "They'll go to trial?" I asked. He nodded. "All of them. State and federal. Conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, Obstruction. Chen's going down with them. And we're looking at more suspects based on what's coming out of the phones and files. Sarah didn't say anything. She just stood, walked to the window, and stared into the dark. Jack followed her gaze. "You okay?" She turned slowly. "No, but I will be." The next morning, I stepped into the study alone. Jack had left behind a box of photographs, copies of the evidence we'd collected, the faces of victims, the snapshots of Derek's fake life. I flipped through them in silence. Then I came to one that stopped me cold. It was a photo of Sarah, taken 2 years ago, at a barbecue Derek had hosted. She was smiling, but it was wrong. Her shoulders were tense, her smile too wide, and now I really saw it for what it was. Not happiness. A hostage pose. I pressed the photo to my chest. "They almost broke her," I whispered, but they didn't. Because she had chosen to speak. Because we had chosen to listen. Because the wolves may circle, but sometimes the village fights back. 2 days after the arrests, I found Sarah sitting on the back steps, a cup of tea in her hand, staring out at the yard like it was a memory she couldn't quite reach. The snow had begun to melt in patches, revealing dull grass and forgotten leaves. Winter was fading, but the cold lingered just like the aftermath of what we'd lived through. "You okay, baby?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "Everyone keeps saying I'm brave." "You are, but it doesn't feel like that," she whispered. "I feel broken, like I don't even know who I am now that he's gone." I sat beside her, pulling my coat tighter. "I think that's what survival feels like sometimes," I said. "Not relief, not celebration, just quiet, like your body knows you made it out but your soul hasn't caught up." She nodded, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "Do you remember when I was little and I scraped my knee on the church steps?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "You bled like someone cut your whole leg off. It's creased too. You sat with me in the bathroom, cleaned it up, and said, 'Just because it hurts doesn't mean it's ruined.'" I reached over and took her hand, and I meant it. She turned to me, her voice shaking. "Then why does it feel like I lost everything?" I squeezed her fingers. "Because you did lose something. Years, trust, pieces of yourself you had to hide just to stay safe. But baby, what's left, what's still standing, that's the strongest part. It's not rares." That afternoon, Agent Kim returned with court updates. Bail had been denied for Derek and Marcus. Chen, ever the snake, had applied for a conditional release, but was denied based on flight risk. The charges had expanded wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and in Marcus's case, perjury. "You're the cornerstone of this case, Sarah," Kim said, laying out the next steps. "Trial prep begins next week. We'll start with witness coaching, testimony review, and mock examinations." "I am Zed. I'm ready," she said. He paused. "We'll also provide a counselor. Someone who can help with everything else." Sarah didn't look away. "I want that. I don't want to pretend I'm fine." Jack came by later and handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Security footage," he said. "From the gym where Derek was arrested. I thought you might want to see it." I hesitated. "Why?" "Because he was afraid," Jack said simply. "And maybe after everything, you deserve to see that." End quote. That night, after Sarah went to bed, I watched the footage on my laptop. It was grainy, black and white. Derek walking out of the locker room, towel around his neck, phone in hand. And then he froze. 6 agents closed in, quiet and firm. He dropped the phone, raised his hands. No fight, no smug grin, no charm, just fear. I watched it 3 times. Not because I enjoyed it, but because I needed to understand something. Monsters don't look like monsters when they lose. They just look like men. The next day, I drove to my old church, the one Sarah scraped her knee in front of. I hadn't been in years, but I needed to sit in that quiet space again, to remember who I was before all this. The stained glass windows still lit up in the morning just right. Dust still danced in the beams like tiny angels. I sat in the back pew, closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself weep. Not for what had happened, but for what we had survived, for what Sarah had become. A few days later, Mia invited Sarah and me to a support group, survivors of coercive control and domestic violence. Women in their 30 seconds to 70 seconds. Every race, every background. Some had visible scars. Others had wounds that lived behind their eyes. Sarah was quiet at first. She listened, nodded, then she spoke. "I used to think it was my fault," she said. "That if I'd just been better, quieter, more loving, he wouldn't have changed. But I see now, he didn't change." He revealed himself. A woman across the circle reached for her hand. Another one nodded silently. And just like that, Sarah wasn't alone anymore. Back home, we began packing away the last of the Christmas decorations. The tree had long since dried out, but I kept one ornament, a small ceramic angel Sarah had painted when she was 8. I hung it in the window. "Why are you keeping that one out?" she asked. "Because it reminds me," I said, "that even in years we'd rather forget, something good always survives." We were survivors now, and every day forward would be a quiet victory, not just because we exposed the crime, but because we found ourselves in the wreckage and chose to rise. The trial hadn't even begun, and already the world had opinions. By the end of the second week, Sarah's name had appeared in 3 national papers and 2 primetime talk shows. Online forums buzzed with headlines. "Whistleblower wife exposes multi-million-dollar insurance scam," or "Domestic abuse survivor brings down crime syndicate." It sounded noble, heroic, but none of it captured what it really felt like to wake up every morning knowing people across the country were dissecting your trauma with their coffee. I made the mistake of reading the comments. "Why didn't she leave sooner? Bet she knew about it all along. Sounds like someone wants her 15 minutes. And we never there." It made my stomach turn. "She shouldn't see this," I told Jack when he came by with another update. "She probably already has," he replied. Sarah didn't mention the media once. She spent her days in prep sessions with Mia and the DA's team, learning how to answer the same questions over and over without flinching. But at night, I could hear her crying through the walls. "They're not angry at me," she told me one evening as we folded laundry. "They're angry because it disrupts their comfort. No one wants to believe bad men are good actors." "Truth is uncomfortable," I said. "But it's still the truth." That week, the prosecutor, a sharp, composed woman named Rachel Hart, invited Sarah to a pre-trial strategy meeting. She wanted us both there. Jack drove us to the courthouse, and as we stepped into the grand, echoing lobby, Sarah gripped my hand a little tighter. Inside the conference room, Rachel stood at the head of a long table lined with files. She greeted us warmly, but her eyes were all business. "I'm going to be blunt," she said. "They're going to attack you. Hard." Sarah nodded. "I'm ready. They'll bring up every fight you had, every moment you raised your voice, every time you stayed. They'll try to twist it into consent." Sarah's voice was steady. "Then I'll explain what fear looks like." Rachel smiled faintly. "Good, because your testimony is our backbone, and the defense knows it." She flipped open a binder. "Chen's lawyers have filed for dismissal, twice. Denied both times. But he's pushing for a jury trial. They think they can confuse the jury, muddy the narrative." "Will they?" I asked. "Not if we stay clear and compelling," Rachel said. "We've got evidence. We've got documents. We've got Jennifer and Sarah. What we need now is to show the pattern. Not just fraud, but control, intimidation, coercion." She turned to Sarah. "Can you speak about the psychological abuse?" Sarah took a breath. "Yes." "Can you speak to the financial manipulation, the isolation?" "Yes." Rachel leaned forward. "And when they ask why you stayed, what will you say?" Sarah looked her straight in the eye. "I'll say I thought silence kept me safe. But I learned the hard way it only kept him protected." There was a pause in the room. Rachel nodded. "That'll do." End quote. After the meeting, Sarah and I walked the courthouse steps in silence. The air was cold, wind whipping around our coats. At the bottom of the stairs, a woman approached, late 50s, white hair in a tight bun, eyes watery. "Excuse me," she said softly, looking at Sarah. "You don't know me, but thank you." Sarah blinked. "For what?" "For speaking up," the woman said. "I didn't, and I lost too much." She reached out, touched Sarah's hand briefly, then walked away without another word. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, then whispered, "That's why I'm doing this." At home, I opened a letter addressed to me, no return address. Inside was a photo, Sarah, maybe age 6, in front of the school playset, smiling in her sun hat. On the back, a note written in neat, unfamiliar script. She was never meant to live in fear. Thank you for helping her remember. No name. But I didn't need one. That night, as I tucked Sarah into bed like I used to when she was a child, she looked up at me and asked, "What if I forget how to be normal?" "You won't," I said. "You're building a new normal, and this time it'll be yours." The morning Sarah was scheduled to testify, I woke up before the sun. I laid in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the stillness of the house. It had become our routine early mornings, long drives to the courthouse, late dinners, even later silences. But today felt different. Today, my daughter would speak out loud what she had carried alone for years. She came downstairs dressed in navy slacks and a cream blouse, hair pulled back, face bare except for a thin coat of mascara. No jewelry, no distractions. She looked like the woman I raised, elegant, centered, determined. "You look strong," I said. "I feel terrified," she replied. "That's okay," I said. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing it scared." Jack drove us, the silence heavy in the car. Even he didn't try to fill it with small talk. At the courthouse, Agent Kim met us at the side entrance and escorted us through the back hallways, away from reporters. Rachel was already waiting in the prep room with her legal team. "Are you ready?" she asked. Sarah nodded, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "You just tell the truth," Rachel said. "That's all they can't argue with." We sat in the courtroom gallery as the judge called for recess before Sarah's testimony. The defense table was packed, 3 attorneys, Derek in a tailored suit, Marcus sitting with an unreadable expression, and Chen, trying too hard to look bored. Sarah took the stand at exactly 10:42 a.m. She swore the oath, sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and when Rachel stood up to begin questioning, the room seemed to shrink. "Miss Thompson, can you describe your relationship with the defendant Derek Langston?" "He was my husband," Sarah said. Her voice was even low but clear. "For 3 years and 4 months. Can you tell us how you met?" "At the clinic where I worked. He came in with a friend, said he was helping with an injury claim. He was charming, confident." Rachel's voice remained steady. "At what point did things begin to change?" Sarah's eyes didn't waver. "After we were married, he started monitoring me, controlling who I talked to, what I wore, when I could go out. At first it was subtle, then it wasn't." "Did he ever physically harm you?" "Yes." Sarah listed the incidents, dates, places, the bruises she covered, the excuses she gave. Each answer was like a pin dropped in silence. "Did you ever feel safe enough to tell someone?" She looked at me for a split second. "No." "Why not?" "Because he said no one would believe me, that I was weak, that my mother was poor and black, and no one would take us seriously, and I started to believe that too." The courtroom was still. Rachel gently guided her through more. The secret meetings, the forged documents, the accidents he helped stage, the nights she overheard names and numbers, the time Derek came home with blood on his sleeve. The box of burner phones she once saw him bury in the backyard, he told her it was trash. Rachel paused. "Sarah, why did you stay?" There it was. The question everyone asked quietly or aloud. Sarah took a long breath. "Because I thought love could fix him. Because I was ashamed. Because every time I thought of leaving, he reminded me how little I had, how far I'd fall. And because when you hear a lie enough times, you start to confuse it with truth." Rachel gave a soft nod. "Thank you, Miss Thompson." No further questions. Then came the defense. A tall man with cold eyes and a silk tie approached the stand. His voice was smooth but condescending. "Miss Thompson, you've painted quite a story here today." "It's not a story," Sarah said. "It's my life." He smirked. "Right. But isn't it true you stayed with Mr. Langston even after he allegedly hit you the first time?" "I did." "And that you never filed a police report?" "I was scared. It's Delphine. Or, were you complicit?" Rachel stood. "Objection." "Sustained," the judge said. "Rephrase." The lawyer leaned in. "Isn't it true, Miss Thompson, that you benefited from the lifestyle Mr. Langston provided? Vacations, cars, money?" "I benefited from surviving," Sarah said. "From breathing through each day, one at a time. That's the only luxury I had. He pressed on pictures from social media, bank statements, suggesting she must have known. Sarah didn't flinch. I learned to smile for the camera. That doesn't mean I wasn't bleeding behind it. Finally, the cross ended. Sarah stepped down. As she passed me, I took her hand. It was cold and shaking, but she was standing. That evening, we returned home exhausted. Sarah curled up on the couch without a word. I made tea, lit a candle, turned off the TV. "You did it," I said. "It's not over," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "But they heard you." She looked up at me, eyes red. For the first time in a long time, I believe they did. After Sarah's testimony, everything felt slower, like the courthouse had slipped into a different rhythm. The halls echoed with footsteps and whispers, but the energy had shifted. Her voice had landed, and now it rippled. Reporters crowded outside, some respectful, others like vultures waiting for a fall. But inside those marble walls, Sarah's words still clung to the air. The jury had listened. Some had leaned forward. One older woman had wiped her eyes. The prosecution spent the next day laying out the framework of the fraud. Emails, bank transfers, security footage, falsified medical reports. Rachel paced in front of the jury like a conductor. Each piece of evidence another note in a devastating symphony. Then came Jennifer. Her voice trembled at first, but Mia sat behind her in the gallery, and I saw her steady with every answer. She spoke of late-night meetings, threats, Marcus's paranoia, the day she found receipts for payouts hidden behind a drawer of socks. "I thought if I stayed quiet, I could protect my kids," she said. "But silence doesn't make them safer, it just gives monsters more room." She mentioned names, dates, patterns. Her words, though not as polished as Sarah's, were equally damning. The defense didn't dare rattle her like they had Sarah. Not with the evidence mounting and the jury growing restless. Still, the days dragged on. We returned to the courthouse every morning, me, Sarah, Jack, sometimes Mia. I packed snacks in my purse like an old habit, slipped tissues into Sarah's coat pockets, brought thermoses of coffee that were rarely touched. At night, I sat at my kitchen table with a journal and tried to write letters I'd never send. One to Derek's mother, one to Marcus, one to myself 15 years ago. He will smile at your daughter. He will offer stability. You will want to believe he is the kind of man your family deserves, but you'll be wrong, and you will forgive yourself, because you must. I didn't know if it helped, but it gave shape to the ache. Midweek, a woman approached us in the courthouse hallway. She wore a maintenance badge, and her hands were rough from work. "I saw her on the stand," she whispered to me. "Your daughter. I've been there too." I didn't know what to say. "I never told anyone," she added. "But watching her, I think maybe I will now." When I told Sarah later, she cried. Not out of pain this time, but something close to healing. "It's like," she said slowly, "each time I speak, someone else finds the courage too." "That's what justice sounds like," I said. "Not just gavel strikes or closing arguments, but echoes." That evening, Jack brought news. "They're cracking," he said, dropping a folder onto the kitchen counter. "Marcus's attorney wants a deal." I stared. "A plea?" Jack nodded. "He'll flip on Chen, wants reduced sentencing in exchange for full cooperation. He knows the jury's leaning against them. You don't offer deals when you think you're winning." "What about Derek?" "Still posturing, still smug, but that won't last, especially when he sees Marcus turn." Sarah sat quietly through it all, sipping tea from the same chipped mug she'd used for weeks now. Her eyes had dark circles beneath them, but she looked calm. "What happens if they all plead out?" she asked. "They'll go to prison," Jack said. "Federal time, no shortcuts." "But no trial?" she asked again. "No verdict?" Jack paused. "Maybe not." Sarah looked down. "I wanted the world to hear it." Jack placed a hand on the table. "They did. They heard you, and they believed you." A few days later, Marcus accepted the plea deal. His confession came in writing typed, signed, and submitted in federal court, 37 pages. A full breakdown of how the ring worked, every name, every account, every staged injury, every time he stood by while others were hurt. He implicated Chen, he implicated Derek, and he implicated himself. When Sarah read it, she was silent for a long time. Then she said, "It's not redemption, but it's acknowledgement." And that, somehow, was enough for now. Later that night, we watched a news segment covering the case. A journalist recapped the charges, the arrests, the testimonies. At the end, she said, in the face of silence, one woman spoke, and the echoes of her voice continue to unravel a web that has held too many captive for too long. Sarah stared at the screen, then turned it off, and smiled. I never thought I'd live to see the day when Derek Langston stood in front of a judge, hands cuffed, face pale, stripped of every ounce of the confidence he once wore like armor. But I did. We arrived early that morning for the sentencing hearing. The courtroom was already half full, reporters, victims, former employees, even a few strangers who'd followed the case on the news and came just to witness it. There was something sacred in their presence. Something that said, "We believe you. We saw you." Sarah sat beside me, fingers laced in her lap. She hadn't worn anything flashy, just a simple dark dress and her natural hair pulled into a soft bun. No need to dress for power. She already carried it. The judge entered. The murmurs died instantly, and Derek was led in, flanked by two marshals. He looked smaller, not physically, but spiritually. His lawyer made a final plea for leniency, citing lack of prior convictions, community contributions, and emotional stress caused by media exposure. It was laughable. Then it was the prosecution's turn. Rachel stood tall, her voice clear. Your Honor, the damage Mr. Langston caused cannot be measured by spreadsheets or legal codes alone. It echoes in the lives he exploited, the women he silenced, the people he maimed through fraud disguised as opportunity. He orchestrated a system that preyed on the vulnerable and then wore their suffering like a cloak of success. He deserves the full weight of justice. Then came victim statements. Sarah was the last to speak. She walked to the podium slowly, the courtroom silent. Derek didn't look at her, not once. When I married Derek Langston, she began, I thought I was building a future. Instead, I was walking into a cage. She spoke of manipulation, fear, and survival, not as a performance, but as a record, a truth laid bare. I've lost years, she said, but I'm here, and I've reclaimed my voice. You didn't break me, Derek. You sharpened me. When she returned to her seat, the entire room held its breath. And then the judge spoke. This case represents not only a financial crime of staggering scope, but a human one. Mr. Langston, you built your power on deception, abuse, and cowardice. You used love as leverage. You mistook silence for submission. You are not simply guilty of fraud, you are guilty of cruelty. He paused. Therefore, it is the sentence of this court that you serve 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. A sound escaped Derek, barely audible but real, like the air had finally left his lungs. The courtroom held still. No applause, no cheers. Just justice. Chen and Marcus were sentenced shortly after 20 years and 18, respectively. Lesser time, but the same end. Prison bars, stripped titles, erased reputations. Back at home, Sarah collapsed on the couch. Not from grief, but from release. It's done, she whispered. I sat beside her. No, I said. It's beginning. There's a Reckely dozen to vary. That evening, we opened a bottle of sparkling cider, our quiet celebration. No parties, no cameras, just mother and daughter, sipping from mismatched mugs at the kitchen counter. You know, she said, looking at the bubbles, I used to think justice looked like punishment. Now I think it looks like truth. You gave it that shape, I said. She smiled. You helped me hold it. Later, I found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. They took so much, she said, but not this, not the sky, not the future. I sat down beside her. They can't take what you rebuild, I said. And tomorrow, well, it's yours now. For the first time in years, I saw peace on her face. Not forgetfulness, not denial, just the stillness that follows after a storm has cleared, and a woman stands alone on her porch, finally knowing that the house behind her and the life ahead both belong to her. 3 weeks passed. No cameras parked outside anymore. No court dates on the calendar. No more subpoenas. Just the steady, unfamiliar rhythm of healing. Sarah started waking up before sunrise again, something she hadn't done in years. Not because she had to, but because she could. She'd make coffee, open the blinds, and sit with a book she never quite finished. Sometimes she'd write in a journal. Sometimes she'd just stare out the window at nothing in particular. The silence was no longer terrifying. It was hers now. We talked less about Derek, not out of avoidance, but because he didn't belong in the present anymore. His name became past tense. His shadow, shrinking by the day. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights, I'd still hear Sarah crying softly behind her bedroom door. Some mornings, I'd find her standing motionless in the hallway, hand pressed to the wall like she was anchoring herself. Trauma, I'd learned, didn't leave clean. It lingered in corners, flared without warning. "I feel guilty," she told me one night, curled on the couch. "For what?" I asked. "For being okay." I reached over, brushing her hair from her face. "That's survivor's guilt," I said. "It makes you question the joy you've earned." She nodded, biting her lip. "There are women who didn't make it out. You made it for them, too." The following weekend, we drove to the coast. No plans, no itinerary. Just mother and daughter, letting the ocean do what it's always done, remind us we're small, but still here. We walked along the shore, barefoot, shoes in hand, waves lapping at our ankles. Sarah stopped at one point, stooped to pick up a smooth piece of driftwood, and held it in her palm like something sacred. "I'm going to keep this," she said, as a reminder. "Of what?" "That I changed course, that I didn't stay sunken." I smiled. "Then it's more than wood. It's proof." I have the mouvement. That afternoon, we ate clam chowder at a roadside diner. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with laugh lines and calloused hands, recognized Sarah. "You're the one from the trial, right?" Sarah froze. The woman leaned closer. "My sister's alive today because she watched you. She didn't leave right away, but she started packing." Sarah's voice caught. "Is she safe now?" "She is." She touched Sarah's shoulder gently. "So are you." Back home, Sarah began to talk about work again, about returning to the nonprofit world, maybe counseling, maybe advocacy. "I don't want this to be my whole story," she said, "but I want it to mean something." "It already does," I said. Jack stopped by a few days later, bringing mail and bad jokes. He looked tired, he always did after a big case, but there was light in his eyes. "You two are doing okay," he said. "We're trying," I said. He glanced at Sarah, who was on the porch brushing dust off an old planter. "She's different," he said. "She's free," I corrected. Then came a letter. Not from Derek, not from the courts, but from one of the trial jurors. It was addressed simply, "To the woman who spoke the truth." Inside was a short note. I wasn't sure at first. I thought maybe it was too dramatic, too rehearsed, but then I saw your hands shaking, and I saw how hard it was for you to breathe between sentences. And I knew, only truth makes a body tremble like that. "Thank you for trusting us. I believed you." Sarah folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. No verdict had meant more. The seasons began to turn. Spring came early that year, blooms pushing through soil that had once been frozen. Birds returned to the yard. Laughter returned to our house. And one morning, over pancakes and sunlight, Sarah looked at me and said, "I think I want to move out. Try on my own again." I smiled. "I think that's beautiful." She paused. "Will you be okay?" I reached for her hand. "I will miss you, but I will also watch you go like a prayer that finally got answered." She moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment near the community center she volunteered at. She painted the walls herself, planted a tomato vine in a pot by the window, adopted a rescue cat named Theo, and each night, before bed, she wrote one sentence in a journal. "I am not who they said I was," because she wasn't. She was stronger, softer, still healing, still here. Sarah's apartment was small, but every inch of it reflected her. Warm throw blankets in mustard and deep green. A coffee table scattered with books on healing, on gardening, on reclaiming the self. Theo, the cat, perched like royalty on a window ledge, watching birds as if guarding her newfound peace. I visited often, never uninvited, never unannounced. This space was hers now, a sanctuary not built for protection from someone else, but for blossoming. The first time I came by, she met me at the door with dirt on her hands and a proud grin. "I planted basil, lavender, and tomatoes," she said. "Want to see?" We stepped onto her narrow balcony, where terracotta pots lined the railing, each one labeled in her careful script. "Do you remember how I used to kill every plant?" She laughed. "You didn't kill them," I said. "They just weren't planted in the right season." She looked at me then deeply, not just with gratitude, but with understanding. "That was me," she whispered. "All those years. Wrong season, wrong soil, trying to bloom in the dark." We stood in silence as a breeze moved through the lavender, releasing a gentle, earthy scent. I closed my eyes. This wasn't justice measured in prison terms or dollar signs. This was justice, too. Sarah had started volunteering twice a week at a women's shelter. Nothing formal yet, just listening, helping in the kitchen, cleaning rooms. But she came home lighter each time, her shoulders less burdened, her voice steadier. "There's this girl," she told me over lunch one afternoon. 19, covered in bruises, barely talks. But yesterday she smiled when I gave her a hairbrush. Just smiled. She paused. "It reminded me of myself. Not long ago." "You're helping her grow roots," I said. "And I'm growing mine," she replied. Jack stopped by a week later, as he always did under the guise of checking in, though I could tell he liked seeing Sarah's strength in full bloom. He and Sarah shared a quiet friendship now, built from trauma but watered with respect. "She's a force," he told me as we sat on the porch. "I've worked with a lot of survivors, but something about her." "She's not just surviving," I said. "She's cultivating." He smiled. "You always did know how to raise strong things." "They grands today?" One evening, Sarah hosted dinner. Just me, Jack, Mia, and a woman named Carla from the shelter who had nowhere else to go for the weekend. Sarah cooked pasta, lit candles, played soft Motown in the background. It felt like family, not one we were born into, but one we chose. After the meal, as we sat laughing over dessert, Carla turned to Sarah and said, "You make me believe there's an after." Sarah looked stunned for a moment, then simply nodded. "There is," she said. I didn't believe it either. But I kept walking, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. That night, as I helped her clear dishes, I asked, "Do you think about him anymore?" She didn't have to ask who I meant. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not with fear, just as a reminder of who I was, of who I'll never be again." She dried her hands, turned to me. "Mom, I want to start a program." "A program?" "For women coming out of coercive relationships. Not just shelter training, therapy, job placement. Something real, something long-term." I stared at her, awe blooming in my chest. "You're ready." "I am." And she was. In spring, her tomatoes bloomed. In summer, she led her first support group. In autumn, she wrote an op-ed in the Oregonian titled, "Silence is Not Peace." It was shared over 1,000,000 times. And in winter, she bought a small plot of land outside the city with plans for a garden, a community space, a retreat. "I want to grow something that outlives what he tried to destroy," she told me. She already had. The news came quietly, like so many things after a storm. Derek had filed a motion for appeal. It didn't surprise us. Men like him don't surrender. They wait, they circle, they try again, believing that the same charm and manipulation that once protected them will bend the system in their favor one more time. But this time, the system was watching. "He won't win," Jack told us firmly, holding the manila envelope that held the details of Derek's appeal. "This isn't about new evidence. It's a desperation play." Still, it stirred something in Sarah. Not fear. Not exactly, but a knowing. That some wounds, when scratched at, could still sting. "He's not trying to get out," she said, scanning the letter. "He's trying to pull me back in, trying to remind me he still exists." "Then let's not give him that," I said. We burned the letter in a small fire pit on her patio, surrounded by blooming basil and late summer tomatoes. The paper curled and blackened in seconds, the embers floating upward like little ghosts finally being released. "This is not my story anymore," Sarah whispered. "Not the way he wants it." 2 weeks later, the court formally denied the appeal. The ruling was swift, the wording strong. No substantial grounds for reconsideration. The verdict and sentence stand. End quote. And just like that, Derek's chapter was sealed. Sarah didn't celebrate. She simply planted more lavender. In the fall, Sarah launched the pilot program she'd been working on all year. She called it Rooted, a space where survivors could come not just to survive, but to regrow. It started with 6 women. They came with hollow eyes and guarded hearts. Sarah greeted each one like they were a long-lost sister. She showed them the garden first, told them how each plant was started from a broken stem, a cut root, a discarded seed. They said these plants wouldn't make it, she told them. Too late in the season, but here they are. She taught them how to dig, how to plant, how to write down the truth without fear of judgment. She taught them how to sit in silence without shame, how to speak without apology. One evening, I sat in on a group session. A woman named Alicia spoke through tears. He told me no one would ever love me with 2 kids and a broken tooth, that I was trash, and I believed him, for 7 years. Sarah didn't rush to respond. She let the silence hold space. Then she said, "He lied." Another woman, barely 21, whispered, "I'm not even sure who I am anymore." Sarah smiled gently. "That means you get to decide, from scratch, and you don't owe anyone the old version." These weren't therapy sessions. These were reclamations. Sarah's name began to spread beyond Portland. She was invited to speak at panels, conferences, and universities. Her op-ed was reprinted in textbooks. Her story became part of workshops for domestic violence response teams. But she never left the garden. She always returned to her balcony plants, her porch swing, her lavender rose out back. "This keeps me grounded," she said, "keeps me real." One day, she received a letter. Not from the courts, not from the press, but from a high school student in Ohio. It read, "My mom stayed, and I never understood why. I was so angry, but then I watched your interview, and I saw her in you, and I forgave her. I think she's learning to forgive herself too." Sarah read it aloud to me, tears slipping silently down her face. "Do you think healing can travel?" she asked. "It already has," I said. On the anniversary of the trial verdict, we held a small gathering at Rooted. Just 30 women. No media, no cameras, just candles, stories, songs. Each woman brought something to bury: a photo, a note, a lie they no longer believed. Sarah brought the bracelet Derek gave her on their first anniversary. A silver chain, delicate, once worn like proof of belonging. She knelt by the old ash tree near the garden's edge and placed it into the earth. "This doesn't mean I forget," she said. "It means I'm done carrying it." That night, under string lights and late blooms, we danced. Not like people celebrating an ending, but like people welcoming a life that had once seemed impossible. And as the music played, I watched my daughter strong, laughing, whole move through the crowd like someone who had walked through fire and come out gold. She was no longer surviving. She was thriving. She was teaching others to bloom where they'd once been buried. And she was mine. The morning air was crisp with the scent of rain and rosemary. Autumn had settled in gently, like a guest who knew how to be quiet. Sarah stood in the garden behind the community center, her garden now checking on the vines, her fingers brushing the leaves like she was taking attendance. Every plant had a story. Every row held the memory of someone who once thought they wouldn't make it. "You talk to them like they're people," I teased as I approached. "They listen better than people," she smiled. The garden had grown. Not just in size, but in symbolism. Women from all over the county had begun visiting Rooted. Some stayed for a day. Others enrolled in the 6-week program. A few came back just to sit and breathe where they once wept. Sarah knew them all by name. She remembered who planted what, who cried under which tree, who brought which fear in their pocket. And they remembered her as the woman who didn't just tell them it was possible, they remembered her as proof. One afternoon, as we were setting up folding chairs for a healing circle, a familiar voice called out from the parking lot, "Mama T." It was Jasmine, one of the first women Sarah had mentored, now working full-time at a shelter in Eugene. She ran up with a grin and a Tupperware dish full of cornbread. "This place smells like peace," she said, hugging Sarah. "Because it is," Sarah replied. After the session, Sarah and I sat under the awning, watching leaves fall like gentle confessions. "I got invited to speak at a conference in Atlanta," she said. "That's wonderful." She hesitated. "But it's national. Big names. I'm nervous." "About what?" "That I'm not polished enough. That I still stutter when I talk about the bruises. That I don't use the right words." I reached for her hand. "You don't need the right words. You are the right words. She blinked back tears. But I still shake sometimes. I still flinch at certain sounds. You still heal. In real time. That's not a weakness, that's a testimony. She exhaled. I think I'll go. Then I'll be the loudest voice in the audience. She grinned. You always are. That fall, Sarah traveled to Atlanta. Her keynote address, The Garden After the Fire, received a standing ovation. She didn't try to be flawless. She was honest. She spoke of days she didn't want to get out of bed, of nights she slept on the floor because the bed reminded her of too much. She spoke of her mother, me, with a tenderness that made my chest ache in the best way. When someone you love believes in your voice before you do, she said, it can carry you through the silence. When she came home, the garden had turned golden. Leaves curled inward. Harvest season had passed. But Sarah walked the rows like they were still in bloom, and I realized they were. Because healing wasn't always green and loud. Sometimes it was quiet, rooted, deep. One morning, we sat on the porch drinking tea. Theo slept curled in Sarah's lap, purring like a motor. I think I'm happy, she said. Think? I teased. I just never thought I'd say that again. Not and mean it. She looked out at the sky, soft with early clouds. I don't want people to remember me as a victim, she said. I want to be remembered as someone who planted something after the storm. I touched her shoulder. You already are. That winter, she hung a new sign outside the community center. It read, You are not what they did to you. You are what you chose to do after. Women took photos in front of it. Some stood there crying, others laughing. Some just stood in silence, hands to their hearts, breathing deeply. And Sarah? She tended her garden. She wrote, she wept, sometimes. She healed publicly, privately, imperfectly. But most of all, she lived. It arrived in a thick cream envelope with gold lettering across the front. The 25th Annual Women of Strength Gala, honoring courage, community, and change. Sarah opened it while we were sipping tea on a quiet Sunday afternoon. She read the embossed print aloud, her voice steady until she reached the final line. We are proud to name Sarah Thompson as this year's Woman of Impact. She froze. I didn't. I cried. She stared at the paper for a long moment, then said, I don't deserve this. I leaned in. Baby, you survived hell, built a garden from ashes, helped hundreds of women reclaim their lives, and wrote the truth into the hearts of strangers. If that's not impact, what is? She swallowed hard. But there are women who've done so much more. Lawyers, doctors, leaders. And you, I said gently, turned your wounds into shelter, your voice into a path. You're not standing next to them, you're among them. The gala was to be held in San Francisco, black tie, high profile, televised. Sarah hadn't worn a dress in years that wasn't for a courtroom or a fundraiser. But this time, it wasn't about survival. It was about standing in the light. The evening of the event, she stepped out of the bedroom in a deep emerald gown that hugged her in all the right places. Her hair was swept up, a gold pin glinting just above her ear. She wore no necklace, just a pair of simple earrings and a confidence that didn't need decoration. Do I look right? She asked. I stood up, heart tight in my chest. You look like a woman who walked through fire and came out a lighthouse. Versailles. The gala hall was shimmering chandeliers like stardust, polished floors that reflected every movement. Women in gowns, men in tuxedos, cameras, applause, laughter. Sarah walked in and turned heads not because she was flashy, but because she radiated something real. During dinner, we were seated at the front with other honorees. A senator who fought for veterans' housing, a surgeon who pioneered trauma-informed care, a teacher who ran after-school programs for girls in gang-affected neighborhoods. And then there was Sarah. When her name was announced, she stood slowly, took the stage without trembling. She didn't speak like someone giving a speech. She spoke like someone opening a letter to the world. I didn't ask to be here, she began. I didn't grow up dreaming of spotlights or microphones. I grew up with a mother who taught me to keep going, to clean the kitchen even when our hearts were breaking, to show up even when the world didn't clap. The room was quiet. I was once told that no one would believe me. That silence was safety. But I learned that silence is where abuse grows, and I chose to be louder than my fear. She paused, hands steady on the podium. This award isn't just mine. It belongs to every woman who ever looked in the mirror and saw nothing but damage. To every mother who waited by the door praying her daughter would come home. To every sister who held bruises no one else could see. She looked out into the crowd, eyes shining. I'm not healed. I'm healing. Every day. And if my story gives one woman the courage to leave, to speak, to plant something new, then that's enough. That's everything. When she stepped down, the applause rose like thunder. People stood, not because she was a speaker, but because she was a survivor, a builder, a light. That night, back at the hotel, Sarah took off her heels and flopped on the bed with a sigh. I can't believe that happened, she murmured. I tucked the award statue into her suitcase, right next to her journal. It didn't just happen, I said. You made it happen. She smiled. Then she added softly, I wish Dad could have seen this, the good man. Before it all broke, I sat beside her. He's here. In the strength he gave me, in the roots he gave you. We didn't speak after that. We just sat, watching the lights of the city blink through the window, and for the first time, the only echo in the room was peace. It was spring again. The garden behind Rooted bloomed early this year, rows of tulips lining the walkway like applause, lavender swaying gently in the breeze, basil growing wild in places it hadn't been planted. Nature had a way of doing that spreading, taking root where it chose, not always where expected. Sarah stood near the old oak tree, a clipboard in one hand, her other gently guiding a new volunteer on how to stake tomato vines. She was wearing jeans, boots, a t-shirt with dirt on it, and a glow that no designer gown could rival. "Morning, Mama T," Jasmine called from the back fence, wheeling in a crate of donated garden tools. "Morning, sunshine," Sarah called back, tucking a pen behind her ear. I watched it all from the bench beneath the trellis, sipping my coffee, heart full. A year had passed since the trial, 12 months since the sentencing, 10 since the appeal was denied, 8 since the gala. And in that time, Sarah had built more than a program. She'd built a movement. The Rooted Center had expanded 2 more plots of land, a therapy room, transitional housing for up to 6 women at a time, new staff, a waiting list for workshops, a scholarship fund named after a woman who never got the chance to leave. But it wasn't about numbers. It was about mornings like this, laughter drifting across the garden. A little boy, Carla's youngest, chasing butterflies with his shoelaces untied. A woman in her 60s painting a bench with bold purple strokes, smiling with every brush. A life once thought over, beginning again. Later that afternoon, Sarah handed me a book. She sat beside me, nervous, like a teenager revealing a secret. "I finished it," she said. "My memoir." The cover was simple. A photo of her hands in soil, palms stained, life returning. The title, Still Blooming. I opened to the first page. I was not saved by a hero. I was not rescued by a system. I was not carried from the fire. I crawled. I bled. I screamed. And then I stood. This is not a story of escape. This is a story of what I built when the cage collapsed. I closed it, eyes damp. "It's perfect," I whispered. "I want to publish it," she said. "Not for fame. For freedom. For the woman still hiding, still unsure." "You will," I said. "And she'll read it, and she'll know it's possible." The night of the launch event, the community center was overflowing. Neighbors, survivors, strangers, news crews, students, friends, women who'd once slept in the back room now stood tall in the front row. I sat beside Jack and Mia, clutching a program with Sarah's picture on it, my heart doing that quiet thing it always did when she stood before a microphone. She didn't read from the book. She didn't need to. She spoke from memory. And this time, she didn't talk about Derek. She talked about beginnings. About the first tomato vine she planted. About the first night she slept without locking her door. About the first time she caught herself laughing and didn't feel guilty. "My story isn't over," she said, "but the chapter of silence is." She raised the book. "This," she said, "is a map for the ones still lost." Months later, I stood in her garden again, just us. Early morning, dew still on the leaves. "Do you ever miss your old life?" I asked. She looked around, at the rows, the women tending plants, the children playing, then at me. "I don't miss who I had to be to survive it." I nodded. And then she asked me something I didn't expect. "Do you think I've made you proud?" I didn't answer with words. I just held her, tightly, as tightly as I did the day she was born, the day she stood in court, the day she moved out. Because pride wasn't big enough a word. Because this wasn't just my daughter. This was a woman who had stared into the mouth of cruelty, refused to vanish, and turned her survival into a sanctuary. A woman who'd taken a punch at a holiday dinner and turned it into a legacy. A woman who no longer needed justice to prove her worth. Because she had become it. In roots. In voices. In every life touched by the garden she chose to grow. This story is a testament to the quiet strength of survivors and the transformative power of truth. It teaches us that healing is not linear, and justice is not only found in courtrooms, it grows in gardens, in community, and in the courage to speak after years of silence. Sarah's journey reminds us that even when broken, we are never beyond repair. With love, support, and the choice to reclaim our narrative, we can turn even the deepest wounds into seeds for change.